everyone. Welcome to Escaping the Chains podcast. I am your host, John Humphreys. If you have not had a chance yet, please go to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and subscribe, follow, and give us a good review. We would appreciate it. As every other episode, we are brought to you by Delivered Media. They are the whole production here, and we will have RJ. He is the man behind the curtain, and he is our producer, and he's the one that sets all this up for us, and we really appreciate him. Today, we have with us our friend Andy, and we're going to have him do an introduction in a second, but he's done some cool stuff with recovery and the recovery community in his hometown. Is Bluffton your hometown?
Yeah.
In his hometown of Bluffton, and we're going to have him introduce himself and kind of tell you some of the stuff he's involved in, and then we want to dig into a little bit of his story and kind of break down. If you're listening, it may have trying to fit in, acceptance, those types of topics, and then of course, probably addiction. So, Andy, how you doing today?
John, I'm doing well.
That's good. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell everybody kind of what you do?
Sure. My name's Andy Yergler. Like you had mentioned earlier, I am from Bluffton. I am owner-operator of a food truck, D&D Fish and Tenderloin. Also, through my recovery journey, I started a non-for-profit called Tri Recovery. Tri as in triathlon. It's a sort of a play on words.
Yeah.
And we sort of focus on the biological side of recovery through that, and also try to help people learn how to relive after they come out of the recovery. We can talk about that at some other point.
Yeah.
I'm a father of 3 children, and pretty much just enjoy work in the recovery world.
Yeah. And doing triathlons.
I do enjoy that sport. That sort of has been my saving grace as well.
Yeah.
As I've gone down this road to recovery.
It really challenges you, doesn't it? Physically and mentally, like I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's one of the few things that I've found in my life where my head, my heart, just soul, it all can connect at certain points. And when that stuff happens, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I want to get on that topic, but I think we'll touch it here a little bit later, just about finding some sort of like fitness, or I think finding a passion after you've been in active addiction. Something you're passionate about is so important, and for some people it's hiking in nature. For you it was like all of the things, the triathlons and being a triathlete. For me it was working out, weightlifting, I would die trying to swim, do a bike, and run in the same day. I can't even do it in the same week.
I think you could do it, John. You're underselling yourself.
Yeah, it takes a lot of discipline. But I do want to get into that. But I wanted to touch on a little bit of your story first. So you just shared at, what was it, Ground Zero?
Correct. Yep.
Ground Zero. They do a service once a month in Huntington, and it's a testimony, kind of a faith-based service. And I had the opportunity, you and I are really familiar with each other, but I had the opportunity to kind of hear some of your story and, your faith, the interesting faith journey you have, because you didn't necessarily just boom, one day wake up and I'm a Christian, like a lot of us kind of had encounters. And I do want to touch on that too. So let's just start with when you were in school and where your story starts, and or maybe where some of your trust issues and that type of stuff started. Let's just start there.
Yeah, sure. So for me, when I share my story, most of the time I start my story somewhere right around the middle school years. Those years when we're going through adolescence, our bodies are changing. We're constantly trying to figure out who we are. I think we have these false perceptions of who we aren't.
Yeah.
A lot of, low self-esteem, lack of self-confidence. And again, I don't know, I throw the word maybe the confusion out there.
Yeah.
Confused, my life, if you go to school that day and you swipe your armpits with 2 strokes of deodorant, like your life's over. I mean, it could be. I mean, these are just these false perceptions that we create during this time.
Yeah.
And I'm in 6th grade, and I tell the story of when I wasn't the most athletic kid. I wasn't the smartest kid, and I was sort of struggling with an identity. And I went out and tried out on the wrestling team, and it was during that time when we were at a conference wrestling tournament, and I was given a swirly that day. And and again, it's one of those things that it set my life on a different direction. My trajectory for where I was changed dramatically because of that event. And again, sometimes I do want to preface this conversation we're having, like, today I'm 46 years old.
Yeah.
And when I look back on that, I sort of want to laugh, like, wow, that, like, one event that happened when you were 12 years old, and just how it had such an impact on your life when really there's no reason maybe that it should have, but it did.
Yeah. So let's go back to that. Let's talk about that. So a swirly. Well, actually, I'll let you explain it. But so you're at the wrestling tournament. Let's talk about like how you ended up in that situation. To where, because this ends up having a pretty big impact on you. So yeah. So you're at the tournament. How did you end up in the situation where you were kind of getting bullied there?
Yeah, I think so. I was a very hyperactive kid, loved sports, probably just constantly bouncing off the walls. I think it's fair to say I was annoying. And I just remember we were at this conference, wrestling meet. I think I lost both my matches, like in a combined time of 1:20. It didn't take long to pin me. And somewhere after the final loss, I had walked into the restroom, and there was a couple guys in there. And, yeah, they decided they were going to give me a swirly. And for those of you out there who are listening who may not know what that is, that's when you put somebody's head in the toilet and you flush it. And I remember sitting there sort of wrestling with these two. They were upperclassmen. And they weren't going to get me in this stall and flush my head in a toilet. I mean, I was confident. That's what I was striving for. I might have went 0-2 on the map, but I'm not going 0-1 in the bathroom, right?
Right.
And so we're sitting here going back and forth, and yeah, they're struggling to make this happen. And then I, sort of noticed like one of my good friends came walking in, and I thought, oh, awesome! Now it's going to be like 2-on-2, and this is fine. This day's going to pretty much. Whatever. They tried, it didn't happen. Well, instead of that occurring, he ends up actually jumping in on their side, and now it's 3-on-1. And again, it's not that I was some kind of a tough kid, because like I just mentioned, I got pinned twice in about 1:30 seconds. But he jumps in and helps them. It was enough manpower to, keep that bathroom stall door open. Two other guys get in there, mission accomplished. They run out laughing, whatever. And I mean, I just remember sitting in there, head soaked, just that. To this day, I still can feel the cold porcelain along my cheeks, and it's just like the betrayal, the feelings of anger and rage just engulfed me at that moment.
So your friend walks in and you think he's going to help, and he turns on you. That's kind of that's got to be a touch damaging. I think, because when I remember being in middle school, I had friends, but I only had, I didn't have big, huge circles of friends yet. Maybe when I was in high school I did. But to have like your friend walk in and for a second you're like, oh gosh, great, now now we can fight back, and then he turns on you. Like, that's got to be a touch devastating for a middle schooler.
Yeah, it really was. And again, now I'm 46. I look back on that, and I mean, it wasn't, I don't think there's ill intent. It was just probably more hey, this horsing around kind of a thing. But at that time, the way I perceived this was, like, man, I'm already struggling with lack of self-confidence. I'm already trying to figure out where I belong, where I don't belong. And that was not part of the equation, that a betrayal of a friend like that. And I didn't know how to process it.
Yeah. When we talk at schools, I think, like, we can look back at that and be like, oh, he got a swirly, no big deal. But for a kid or for a young adult going through that stuff, everything's so big.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times they're not looking at future. So like when we have interaction with young adults, it's little things like that. Like those things have huge impacts on their direction. Cause like I think so you have a friend walk in, doesn't help you, you feel betrayed. Now you're going to like run to anybody that will accept you where you fit in kind of, you know. I don't know if that's what happened with you, but that's kind of what you're left with is like, okay, anybody that'll accept me, you know. But like the trust issues that can come from those things that seem little that are actually big, and some of the other damaging stuff, just like I said, like the self-confidence, and like, where do I belong, you know. And you see it with students a lot of times. It's like that little something like that is the one thing that can set them off into a horrible series of decisions, maybe even self-harm. Like there's so much impact that one, we call them impact moments. My friend Nathan, we hear him speak sometimes, and he talks about these impact moments, and that is like a huge impact moment, you know. So it is easy if like we're listening, like, oh, he got a swirly, you know what I mean? No big deal, whatever. But the impact it has on a child, because they're walking through life every day. They wake up and it's the only day they're going to exist. You know what I mean? Everything is big. That day is big. Everything that happens in it is huge, and it just has an impact on. Some of those days have an impact on the rest of people's lives. So having had that, what do you think? What was the impact that had on you moving forward, and kind of what happened with you after that as you were trying to search through still had all the big, you know, all these hard things we have to do in life when we're that age. What was next? Like, what was next? Where did that lead you to?
Yeah, again, the day-to-day, it's hard to recollect, but I know shortly, about probably maybe 90 days later around the track season,
Yeah.
there was another incident that took place where the track practice was over. We were waiting for our parents to come pick us up. Kids were just horsing around, playing, having a good time. Again, I'm assuming I was probably bouncing all over the walls. And
Yeah.
again, another eighth grader at that time sort of came up, grabbed me by my arms, sort of pushed me in the wall, and just, told me, hey, you stay here till your mom picks you up. And yeah, like just we don't want to pretty much play with you. We don't
Yeah.
want you around us. You're this, you're that. And again, I mean, those feelings that I had experienced months prior, just again engulfed me. And this time it was more intensified. And I still, I mean, to this day, I remember thinking, okay, this will never happen again.
Yeah.
Like something snapped in me that day.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned earlier about how, you go out and you search for that identity then, or you try to figure out where you do belong. And that then eventually led to the self-harm as far as just with substance abuse.
Yeah. So you said to yourself, this isn't going to happen again. What was life? So what did you do once your mindset was, this isn't happening to me again? Where, what was your next move?
Yeah, so I think at that point there was a chip on my shoulder that was being built, and I was hot-headed. I mean, anytime anybody wanted to violate my space or lines that I thought were crossed, I mean, it was going to be a fight, and it was just that. I would never feel that kind of disrespect or that kind of embarrassment again. And again, I'm processing this again as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old. And there's probably so many moments in my life, not just even then, but as I went through my 20s and my 30s, where there's probably some issues. It was just life, like, hey, sit down, have a conversation, move on. But I mean, I could just hold a grudge like no other. Again, we talked about the perception of that day in or at that wrestling meet, how you look back on it now and it's like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. I do this with different conversations or just different things that have happened throughout life in my 20s and 30s where like, yeah, that did not have to be handled that way. But because of the way I felt during those times and never really just dealing from, trauma is a word that we use a lot today. It wasn't really a word we used back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
But just not dealing with the crap.
Yeah.
It just escalated it affected, I think, several relationships throughout life. The irony is, the more this is never going to happen to me mentality took place, I think the more and more insecure I even became.
Yeah.
Even when I thought that, well, I'm going to I dare someone to do that, but there's still such a lack of self-confidence. And I think I carried that all the way up to my late 30s.
Yeah. You can carry it your whole life. When you get to that place of like, no, you have something to prove, nobody's going to cross me. And people literally end up in prison for the rest of their lives, or end up, seriously hurt or dead trying to prove that, trying to avoid that kind of stuff happening to them again. And I think for me, I've had moments when I was in active addiction. I was a pushover for a little while. I was just like, I depended on people to get this stuff, and then something happened to me around when I got sober, and I've had to check that with salvation of like, you know what I mean? Like, well, I wouldn't say when it happened, because when I was younger, I wasn't really a pushover, but I had a few years though, and it was like when I snapped out of that, it was like, I'm going to be a dog. You know what I mean? Like nobody's going to play with me and any of that. And then God softened my heart over the years. But like when you come out of that, like you're willing to go to whatever length, to prove, or to not feel that again, whether it's rejection, embarrassment, all of that. Like you literally change your whole life and how you operate to where that doesn't happen again. So let's move forward. So you've had these things kind of going on, and you started using drugs. What did that look like? Like what did you start with? And
Yeah, so this all happened around sixth grade. The following year, I was with a friend, and he invited me to stay the night. And after school that day, we went back to his house, and his grandparents lived by him, and they were in Florida, and for the winter. That night we went into their house, we got into the liquor cabinet, and that was my first experience with substance abuse or drinking or anything like that. And like in that first experience, I ended up drinking maybe like 8 shots of vodka in
Jeez.
20 minutes.
So you were gone.
I was getting an education that evening. And then, we ended up then going and drinking, I don't know how much of a handle or a fifth of Jack Daniels, but I had alcohol poisoning. I was in rough shape.
Yeah.
And this is on like a Friday night. And I remember the next day thinking, okay, oh, great, now I'm going to go to school and hear about this, and this is all I need. What was I thinking? I hated myself even more.
Yeah.
And went to school that Monday, but it was quite the opposite. It was almost like, hey, did this really happen? Oh my, well, I've always wanted to try it. And then I've always wanted to try to drink, or I wanted to do this. And it's like, oh, okay, well, and then all of a sudden it's like my identity started to shift toward this like party, or toward this kid that just didn't give a rip.
Right.
Hey, whatever. And I think my whole attitude in life changed that way. The things that were important to me, like sports, doing my best as far as I was never a great student, but, I was always taught to do my best. All that was going out, and now it became more of, okay, no, this is more the bad boy or character going to be being built here for the next several years.
Yeah. So then what was next? So did you start partying a lot?
Yeah, all through middle school. I ended up getting kicked off the basketball team, I think, twice in a matter of a month or so. I got caught smoking, ended up getting kicked off of that, and then I was left with pretty much, again, I had nothing really going for me as far as from the school perspective. I was in enough trouble. I was constantly in and out of in-school suspension. I think my parents were ready to throw their hands up in the air, like, what do you do? They had lost all control. And so throughout high school, started then smoking weed with, and all that. And I personally have never been a weed fan. I never liked it. Always slowed me down. It was always makes me tired, hungry, just unproductive. And that was never like my choice, but hey, nobody was really doing it at that time. And again, this was early 90s. This wasn't like it is in today's culture. But it was, so therefore, since nobody was really doing it, let's do it.
Yeah.
And that was my attitude. And then after I graduated high school, I moved to Fort Wayne, and that's when I was introduced to cocaine, and that was game on, game over.
Yeah, cocaine with that personality is a dangerous mix. So you were in Fort Wayne, and you started messing with cocaine. What happened? So what did that lead to?
So once I was at a party one night, and I did cocaine for the first time, and I say it's like the worst 100 days of my life. Became a coke addict, sort of just like that. I loved it, and I went on about a 100-day binge with it. I had easy access, and now my life was totally out of control, and I had a decent job right out of high school. I got fired from that, and all I wanted to do was get high. And I would go on binges, and then eventually, it was probably about 5 months out of high school, I was arrested in Bluffton for dealing cocaine. I was 18 years old, and I was arrested, and the judge ended up giving me the best plea deal that the state brought to me was a 15-year prison sentence. I think
15 years?
15, yep. And I had no priors or anything like that.
18 years old, and the best plea you got was 15 years.
He did me a favor by suspending 5 years. But pretty much, go figure it out kind of a thing. So, I remember sitting in the county jail pleading for my dad to bail me out after I got arrested. And I hate that. I'm changed. Like I've learned my lesson.
Yeah.
And my dad was like, you know what, this is, and then we talk about it still something to this day. And I mean, it's still one of the hardest things he's ever done. But he's like, no, you're staying. And like he would not bail me out. And it was the best thing he could have done. Because if he would have bailed me out that day, no question, I was going right back to old places, and I was going to be high that night.
Sometimes bailing people out is creating a problem. And I had a conversation about this the other day because we want to do the right thing. And we want to help people. But sometimes, somebody will go bail somebody or bond somebody out, and other people are praying for them to stay locked up so they can get sober, or you go bond somebody out that could cause problems to somebody else. You have to really use, discernment, and you use your mind and get all the details before you just go bailing people out. Because sometimes helping people is actually not what it looks like they want you to do.
Yeah, and I think that's always, that could easily be a form of enabling. Mm-hmm. And I know sometimes the worst thing you could do is, hey, I don't want to leave my son in jail. But, I think that as a dad myself now, I would a lot rather, if my kid was in that situation I was in, I would a lot rather see them sitting in jail than having to go visit them at the morgue. Yeah.
So through this, so now you're in prison. At 18 years old? Or were you 19?
I had turned, 19. So I had just turned 19.
So you turned 19, you're in prison. You're headed to prison.
I was headed to prison.
That's wild. That's a lot, isn't it?
It was. I remember they came in. I got sentenced in 1998 in February, and I ended up going to the RDC, or the Reception Diagnostic Center, there in Plainsfield, Indiana. That's sort of for people who aren't familiar with how the way the prison system works. Whenever you're sentenced to the DOC, you will go to the RDC for 30 days. That's where they test your mental IQ. They run all these different tests on you. They want to make sure that, they ask questions like, did you used to harm animals? Did you have any kind of abuse, sexual abuse in your family? I mean, and they do this analysis on you.
Yeah.
And then from there, they will distribute you across Indiana to whatever level of security prison they feel that, one, you belong to, second of all, where they have a bed at.
Yeah.
So I remember sitting there, and you're locked down 23 and a half hours a day. It's just you and your cell. You're coming out for about 10 minutes at a time to eat some breakfast at 5 in the morning, doing lunch at 11 and dinner at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and you're just in your cell. And I mean, for me, I was there for, I think, 28 days. And I think probably around somewhere in the middle, about day 19 is when I broke. Like I was like, okay, what have you got yourself into, Andy?
Yeah. Did you pray? What was your faith like?
Yeah, so at that time, my faith was I was raised in a religious home. I was raised with this idea that, when you're young, you just pretty much, you sow your wild oats.
Yeah.
And then when you get in trouble or you come to some kind of a certain magical age, which you will know because God will reveal it to you, then you join this church and all your problems go away. I mean, that was pretty much the gist of the way I perceived and understood the way I was being raised and what God was. So obviously I sowed some wild oats.
Yeah, you did.
And I was ready to get out of my trouble. But you know what I found out, John? It didn't work that way.
Right.
So, but yeah, I spent some time while I was in there. Again, the only book I had in that cell was a Bible. So I think I read from Genesis all the way through Isaiah in those 27 days. I mean, I had nothing else going on. On Wednesdays, there was a softball diamond, and there were probably, I don't know, middle-aged kids that played softball, and it was in March, so I think it was practices. So on Wednesdays and Thursdays, they seemed to have practices on those diamonds. If I would put my head up against the window and really squint over, I could watch a little 2-hour softball practice. I mean, I was trying to figure out anything to keep my mind occupied.
That's wild. So with your faith, though, you didn't. So you read the Bible, and while you were at RDC, yeah. Where did they send you after that?
So, yep. They woke me up. They told me the day before that I would probably be leaving the next day, 3 a.m, is when they usually hauled people out of there. And sure enough, at 3 a.m, they came to the door, cuffed up, all that good stuff. And I thought I was probably headed to Chain of Lakes there in Albion, Indiana, just a nice little level 1 facility. And they got us all loaded up, and we realized we were on our way over to Westville.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, 19. It's interesting. I remember pulling into I remember seeing Westville from the road. I mean, this prison's like a mile square. There's 3 different units. I mean, it's massive. It looks like a massive college campus in a sense. Big old smokestack tower. And I remember going down the road that led to the gate that we would enter. And yeah, one gate opens, the van pulls in, that gate shuts, we get out, they unshackle us, and they take us straight over here to this receiving area where they issued our clothing. I was given a pair of penitentiary boots. I was given 2 pairs of khakis, 3 T-shirts, and I think it was about 3 pairs of socks, and each one of those pairs of socks has holes in them. And I was given 3 used pairs of boxers. And one of the boxers didn't have tags in it, but I didn't need the tags because I could tell by the stains which side was the front and which side was the back. And I realized again, oh my, this is just getting worse.
Yeah. How long were you there for?
So I ended up doing a little over 14 months at Westville. And then I was transferred from there eventually to Channel Lakes. And that's where I ended up doing about 3.5 years of my incarceration was at Channel Lakes in Albion.
Yeah. So again, back to the faith thing. So through this time, would you say that you believed in God, or were you what was that piece like for you? Were you because you said you were reading the Bible when you were at RDC, as you got released into these other situations, what was that like for you?
Yeah, so when I was at Westville, a preacher would come in and he started talking about this thing called grace.
Yeah.
And this unconditional love. And I mean, this was something I never heard or I never understood about God. I mean, everything was always conditional. You do this, you get this. You don't do this, this is going to happen. And everything was conditional. This wasn't like this, hey, no, there's this grace, there's this mercy, there's this unconditional God. Like, he loves you, and yeah, I mean, he just wants you to surrender to him, and no matter what you've done in life, like, one, it doesn't matter if it's good, it'll never be good enough. But second of all, it doesn't matter how bad it is, it can never be bad enough. And so I started wrestling with all this again, and I'm trying to figure some things out. But in my head, I'm still just, again, it's the way I was raised, and it's what I knew. And I had heard being raised when questioning some of this stuff, like, hey, this is what I've been hearing. This makes sense. You know, there's comments made, well, that's just an easier way. Or, you know, if you're going to do it this, you know, Jesus said the path's very narrow. I mean, it was just twisted scripture nonstop.
Yeah. So you had some spiritual confusion then.
Oh,
I
definitely.
think it's safe to say. Let's go to when you get out of prison.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you got out finally?
23.
So 23. So you did about 4 or 5 years.
A little over 4 years, 7 months.
Yeah. So what was getting out? So just tell us about like getting out, readjusting to life. You're still in your mid-20s, you know what I mean? So you're still pretty young.
Yep. So I come home from prison, went back, lived with my mom and dad for about 5-6 months. Then ended up, I met a lady while I was incarcerated from just families knew each other kind of a thing. And we ended up getting married maybe about 6-7 months after my incarceration, and probably a little too soon. We both were dealing with stuff that we probably should have dealt with before we just tied the knot, but we did. And yeah, life was moving on. I was working at a factory that was just getting started, and listed to go back to school, started working on my 4-year degree, ended up getting my 4-year degree through Indiana Wesleyan University right here in hometown Marion.
Right.
And, you know, in the process of all that, my wife and I, we had a child. I'm off probation. Things are going somewhat decent. But, you know, something that I look back on that now, and part of the story I share is this, you know, when I came home from prison, I came home sober, but I never came home recovered.
Right.
And now all of a sudden I'm doing life again. There's stresses. There's trying to be a husband, trying to learn how to be a dad. I need to go put this food on the table here. I'm working on this degree. I get my 4-year degree, but then all of a sudden, because of my felony, I really can't find any kind of employment. This would have been around 2008 when the economy was starting to change again.
Yeah,
right before the housing
it was
crisis.
a lot different back then too. You know, I mean, as far as like having a record and getting hired, there's still a lot of challenges. But back then, you know, at that time, it would have been really hard.
Yeah, so, you know, back in, again, that was sort of like the borderline. The technology was starting to really, like, employers, like, hey, fill everything out online. So, you know, you had to, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Well, yeah, you check yes. Well, that's going straight over to the
Right.
trash bin, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not even getting in front of somebody to try to sell yourself, tell them your story, or, you know, who you were, where you're going, what you were, what you are today. It was just, and so that was, again, we talked about the rejection there in that bathroom at that wrestling meet. Them feelings, again, of just this rejection, this whole, okay, I'm going to show you kind of a thing.
Yeah.
It just, the way I handled that situation in 6th grade and throughout several other occasions, this was another incident in my life where I was like, okay, I got this chip's getting bigger. Mm-hmm. And I started to go back to drinking, and I started drinking probably about maybe a year before I graduated. And
college.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this would have been after I was off probation. So I was probably about 25, 26.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it just escalates. And I mean, I'm in the same situation I found myself in, sort of with the cocaine, in the sense of this is totally out of control. My life's becoming unmanageable at this point, and I've got a problem. Yeah.
So you're starting to feel the rejection again as you're trying to find jobs, and you're now trying to be a husband, trying to be a father. So let's just, as that stuff is going on, what's going on in your life, and how do you feel like you are managing all of the things, and how was your relationship?
So I felt like parts of my life I was catching up, I was getting ahead. I was focused. I was using a lot of this stuff as a chip on my shoulder. Well, hey, if this ain't gonna go this way, I'll make it happen.
Yeah.
If we can back up just a little bit.
Absolutely.
When I came home from prison, I ended up going back to the church where I was, raised in. I went back, and during my incarceration, the people were extremely supportive. They were
the church.
Yeah, the parishioners.
Yeah.
And there's no question. I've never questioned they didn't love nor care about me, and the support was overwhelming.
Yeah.
But again, with it being the religion that it was like, so I talked to obviously some of the ministers, the elder, about, okay, hey, this grace thing, like this unconditional love, and that just wasn't where they were at.
So when you started, you learned in prison as you were going to chapel and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They talked about, of course, you know what I mean, because we all fall short. They were talking about the love of Christ and the grace of Christ, and the background that you came from didn't receive that so much, or it wasn't like something
Right.
they talked about much.
Yeah, for example, like there was a belief that, you can be saved one day, but then you go out and do something, a sin of, like, again, they would put weights on sin.
Yeah.
You go out and you commit a sexual sin, you're no longer saved. And then it would be you were working your way back to God.
Yeah.
If you go out and you do something that I've always felt like if it just brings bad publicity to the church, then you're going to get excommunicated and they're going to tell you you're not saved.
Yeah.
And I had someone very dear in my life at that time who was sort of, again, just a young man. He was struggling with just life, and he was a member at that time, and he did go out, and there was some sexual sin, and they did, the church excommunicated him. I remember talking to the elder a couple of weeks later. He came up and talked to me about this gentleman, and he said, hey, make sure you're praying extra hard for, we're just going to call this guy Bob.
Yeah.
Pray extra hard for Bob, man, because, we need to make sure he comes back into the fold. And I'm like, well, I'll pray extra hard for him, but I don't know about this come back into the full thing, because God's, his mercy, his love, it's unconditional. And then it became this whole discussion like, well, so you're saying you believe in once saved, always saved. And then we had these conversations, and long story short, I come home from prison. He doesn't want to baptize me. He gives me like 20 questions that like a litmus test for me to enter this church almost.
Right.
Like nobody. I talked to my parents about it. I talked to other friends. Like, no one's like, they never heard anything like this. Yeah. But pretty much it was like, no, you're going to agree to all this or you're not getting baptized. Again, rejection.
Yeah.
And, my faith at that point was just, it was just dying. I was mad. And then there was another local church that was started by another pastor who used to be a pastor at that church, but he left for the same reasons where, hey, no, he understood grace. Yeah. And sort of had the same kind of response. He'd go out, with this loving God, this unconditional love, grace. And, one of the comments I remember he and I were talking, and one of the higher ups in that organization made the comment, well, if we preach that, then we lose control of the church.
That's scary.
Right?
RJ, did you hear that? Yeah, that's a scary place to be, isn't it, when you're worried about control of the church? Yeah, I think so when you get into these conversations, the church is basically the bride of Christ, and it doesn't belong to people. You know what I mean? It doesn't belong to people. And sometimes people get to this level of like control. RJ, I believe it can start from a loving place. You know what I mean? Like a fear of, if we let people go out there, the devil's going to get them. But what it turns into is so manipulative not anything like I think what the biblical church would look like, and it becomes about control of people, and it becomes about the pedestal that we put certain people in the church on. When the Bible says, the least of us is the greatest among us, so the people that serve are actually the most, you have to serve to be a true disciple of Christ. Like, you have to serve. And I think sometimes that stuff people get that stuff mixed up. So a lot of the church sometimes, and I'm not talking about all of the churches, but some of the churches will be like, well, people aren't coming to church. It's like, well, they know what you are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They know what you stand for. They got close enough and they realize, like, this is about control. It's not about serving people. It's not about growing in your faith and learning what the Bible says and me giving you the tools to learn and read the Bible on your own. It's like the oldest manipulation in faith is like, I have to read this to you and I have to tell you the rules. And we need to be discipled and we need teachers, but some people twist that. And it's such a hard thing for the true follower of Christ, because people will be like, I don't like what you stand for. And it's like, you don't know what I stand for. You're talking about, manipulation of Jesus Christ, what Jesus Christ is, manipulation of the Bible, pulling things out and miscommunicating what it's actually saying and just taking a couple of scriptures. And so a lot of people want to be like, they want to be the veil between God and a relationship and the people. You know what I mean? And so it's like, so you have to come through us. We know what's best. And sometimes that's right. I need people speaking into my life that know more than I do. But when it's that, it's like, nope, you can't. For you to have a relationship with God, you have to follow our rules, right? And then we can help you get to this relationship with God, maybe. But we're more concerned about you having a relationship. We want you as a member of what we're doing, and they want followers of them.
Right.
So,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's religious. It's not Jesus.
yes.
I mean, it's what it is. And again, it's one of those things, perspective, context. I'm 23, 24 years old. I have just spent over 4.5 years incarcerated, and now I come home and I've got someone who's, the way I perceive this was more of like a prison guard. Tell me, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to say this, or you're not going to get your phone call,
Yeah.
And it's like, no, this ain't happening. I'm not living my life like this no more. And then I made a decision to where, well, I'm done. I'm not going to this church. And then now all of a sudden, it's like this whole community that supported me. It was like, I just felt like I left them down. I felt like they probably thought, well, hey, look, he just used us while he was incarcerated. And I was like, it had nothing to do with any of that. It was, and again, this day, I've got a lot of great relationships with many of them, great people. A lot of them love Jesus. I don't question that. But again, and the church over the last 20 years has done like a complete 180 turnaround.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think that my generation and younger realize, look, this just isn't, this is religion.
Yeah.
And they made some pretty big changes. And but at that time, in the context, I was like, man, I just don't have anything to do with this. Like, this isn't who I am. I think I'd rather just keep drinking and be a drunk.
Right. Okay, so let's move forward a little bit. So you're married and you had the kid. Some of the stuff's going successful for you, right? And some's falling apart. So as we move forward, obviously the marriage didn't work out, and you don't have to touch on that if you don't want to. But let's move a little bit up the road here. And how did you end up? So with you drinking again and stuff, how did you end up finding sobriety or recovery or freedom from that again?
Yeah. So it was 2010. I had been drinking again for about maybe 3 years at this point, but life out of control. I didn't like who I was. I despised myself. And that's the other thing that I really liked about the drinking was that it gave me like a double whammy. One, I liked the way it made me feel, but second of all, I love to just torture and self-destruct with it. It was like, oh, well, that's not my fault. If I wasn't drinking, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was just, and these are the games. And then I would, then I would sober up, and then I have to go look myself in the mirror, and I would just despise myself. And then in order to just show myself how much I didn't like myself, I would just go drown myself in more alcohol, you know?
Then keep blaming the alcohol.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
just this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And this just went on and on. Finally, in 2010, a gentleman called me and said, hey, listen, I'm putting a team together, about 5 guys. We're going to go with this organization called All Hands. We're going to go to Haiti. We're going to help out with this earthquake aftermath, and I want you to go. And I had 1,000 excuses why I wasn't going to go.
Yeah.
But and this guy, he's been my mentor throughout life, and you just can't win.
Right.
It was like, okay, you win, uncle, I tap out.
Yeah.
When we going? So he ends up putting this crew of about 5 of us together, and we go to Haiti. And I met this gentleman there, and I didn't know this guy, but he didn't even want to go on this trip. But we talk about it years later. He's just like, he would tell his wife, I don't want to go, but I don't know. I just feel like God's telling me I need to go on this trip. And then, and it was just like, Andy's going to be there kind of a thing. And I don't know. I'll go. I don't want to, though. So he and I, neither of us wanted to do this. But we go. And over that 10 days or 8 days, however long we were there, we formed this friendship. He had been sober for about 5 years. And just talking to him was like, that's what I want there. There's something different between your sobriety and me being sober. And so we got talking, and I don't think we used the words or terms recovery or things like that, but it was just something was different than just being sober.
Right.
He was full. He was content. He was at peace. And so when we came back to the States, he told me, listen, I will walk with you for however long this takes. He goes, but there's 2 things that are going to have to happen. One, you cannot lie to me. Lying to me means you're telling me that you're not drinking, but you're drinking. You tell me, hey, I'm done drinking and you relapse, I'm not going to consider that a lie. I mean, but don't tell me you're not drinking and you're drinking. And second of all, you got to want it. I said, fair enough, let's do this. So we met. This was in 2010, October of 2010, okay? This is 2025. We're talking 15 years ago.
Yeah.
To this day, we still meet on Fridays every week for a cup of coffee and breakfast.
Yeah.
It's gone from a sponsor to a best friend. But from 2010 to 2016, 6 years, I told the gentleman probably over 250 sometimes, I'm done drinking. And he would keep a calendar, and he would mark this calendar. And then finally, the last time I did tell him, and I haven't had a drink since July 3rd of 2016, so it's been a little over 8.5 years.
So 6 years you were meeting with him and still drinking.
Yes. Yep. And he showed me this whole unconditional side of life.
6 years, yeah, because you'd be ready to.
Right?
This due date.
He had people come up to him and be like, why are you wasting your time with this guy? You know he's not going to change. And his comment was, well, I like him and he's becoming a friend. Like it wasn't about, oh, he's a mission. It wasn't this whole concept, this paradigm of the way I was raised in what a Christian looks like as far as you do this, you get this.
Yeah.
I mean, this is him saying, I know. And I joke with him today, but he's very systematic. He's very well thought before he does something. Not a high risk taker.
Yeah.
But I always joke with him, like he just loved to watch me do my crazy stuff. Because
you are kind of a risk taker by nature, right?
Yeah, I would say that's probably my personality.
Yeah. I would say it is.
As I get older, I'm taming down.
You're tamed down. It still seems like a risk taker to me.
But so he and I, we do this, and 6 years later, finally, I take my last drink.
Yeah.
And it was. And in the midst of all that, though, like just faith-wise, I mean, I lost all faith. Like, I would say I've probably been agnostic from like 2002 until, probably about 2023 or 24.
Yeah.
About a good 22 years where it's just like, you know what, there's something out there. I'm not going to be arrogant enough to say that there's no God, but at the same time, I don't think we can know this God, and I don't think this God really cares to know us.
Yeah, and it's interesting because so I've known you for a few years now, and you know the Bible, right? Like even when you and so let's talk about this. So we used to do a Friday night service, right? That we are actually starting back up here in Marion, Indiana, and that's where we met.
Yep.
So I noticed you coming in, and then we had I don't know if you remember this or not, but we had a little conversation, and you were like, hey, you introduced yourself, and you were like, I didn't want to come here the first time. You know what I mean? Like, wasn't it a date? Actually, I'm going to let you tell the story of how you ended up coming to this. So basically, we do this Friday night service. We do it downtown. It's a little different than it's not a church service per se. It is church, so don't get me wrong. It's Jesus focused. We do praise and worship. We pray for people, but you never quite know what's going to happen in this service. So you show up. Explain to me how you ended up at this service to begin with.
Yeah, so I attend Brianna's Hope chapter there in Bluffton. And I know a lot of people who attend that chapter would come to your Friday night service, and they're like, Andy, you got to go check this out. And it's right up, it sounds like it's right up my alley. Like, okay, yeah, I will. You know, it's in Marion, though. But,
Yeah.
And so anyhow, somewhere in the midst of all this lady, her daughter swims on the swim team that my son swims on.
Yeah.
And out of nowhere, we sort of just connect on social media.
Yeah.
And we decided to go out for dinner. And she's a awesome woman. She's been a Christian all her life. Our backgrounds are totally different.
Yeah.
And I don't think she's ever used anything in her life. I think she's it just wasn't her thing. And so I'm like, I knew that church was important to her. I've been wanting to come check out your church.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I'm going to press her. Hey, I'll take you to church on our first date. And I really thought maybe like, okay, I'm going to take her to this church, and then that's probably going to be our last date regardless, but
Yeah.
at least I took her to church on a date, right?
Yeah.
But it was quite the contrary. That was a powerful moment for both of us. I think the comment I made when we left that night was, I have never been in a room full of so much brokenness, but
Yeah.
felt whole.
Yeah.
And I think she felt that same way. And the thing that always struck me from that night was just watching people. And again, we've talked about this. I mean, the budget of that church is very low.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you guys try to feed everybody. You try to do what you can, right?
Yeah.
And as you pass that plate around, I mean, I'm watching people literally pull change out of their pocket, loose change, and just drop it in the plate. And I'm like, man, they're giving it all.
Yeah, well, that's what we would pass that tray around, because that's how we paid for food and some of the bills for the service, you know. And you'd get that tray back sometimes, and there'd be like pennies and dimes in there, and you're like, somebody literally probably they gave what they had, you know what I mean, crinkled up dollar bills. And I always that always had an impact on me, and just like watching people interact, that they weren't going to check a box. They weren't going because, like sometimes on other services, people are going because their family goes. Like, these people are stepping out of their comfort zone because they wanted to kind of experience something. And it was, so many of us have different stories, but we came from the same vein of society. And we so it's a group of people that know what it's like to be written off, and a group of people that know what it's like to be restored and saved by Jesus Christ. Yeah. And not all of them. You know what I mean? We had some people come in, some people never, actually came to the altar, but some you slowly watched, you know what I mean? They would start to, so you saw the people putting their change in the tray, and
yeah, that was going on. And then I think, I don't know if it was that first night or it was coming back another time, but, you see that mom with their 4 or 6-year-old child. And you don't know the whole story. Maybe they're on a visitation. Maybe she just got her life sort of put back together, just got her kid back. But it's like, and you just see them holding their hands, and they're just holding on for dear life.
Yeah.
And it was just like, this place is like, this is where I belong. If Jesus is going to walk back, and again, not that anybody in there is special,
Yeah.
more than anybody else, but it's the paradigm. This was the heart of Jesus. Like, this is the woman that, they're about ready to stone.
Yeah.
And he says, hey, listen, you without the first stone, throw it. But then when they all walk away, he's like, you've been married 3 or 4 times and you're living with someone right now. Like, hey, go sin no more. And it's not necessarily that, like, go live that perfect life.
Yeah.
But I think he's reaching in that woman's heart and trying to get her to say, go deal with the trauma.
Yeah.
Go look at the gratitude. Deal with the trauma and start appreciating all that you do have. And when I walked into that church on Friday nights, I didn't go every Friday, but I try to get at least a couple times a month. I always walked out there thinking that, like, man, this is a place where you can come and heal. Like, you're with the like-minded. Like, no one's there pretending to. I mean, there's a song I once heard, but the lyrics was, "You can't pretend around pretenders." I mean,
Right.
we all know, like, okay, cut the game.
Yeah.
This isn't about who's holier or righteous more than thou or whatever. This is about a broken people. For this moment in time, right now, we're sober.
So with your faith journey, you said it's shifted over the last year, maybe?
Yeah.
So tell me what happened.
Yeah, so it was back in April. We had that big phenomenon, that eclipse.
Yeah.
And we were sitting in the backyard of the lady who I brought on our first date. We're still dating.
Yeah.
And we're sitting there in her backyard, and I'm watching this thing take place.
Yeah.
And I mean, it moved me. Just the sheer power, how fast everything's going, and just trying to. I'm not a genius by no means. I always tell people, and this is a true story, I graduated 10th in my class in school, and that's 10th from the bottom. So, but what I am computing in my head is the sun's big, the moon's big, but the sun is so much bigger than this moon. This world is just spinning. And within about a total of, I forget what it was, 15 or 18 seconds of totalitarian, whatever, like, this moon blotted out this sun to complete darkness. And then here we go. And with about 2 hours, it was back business as usual. And it was just like, holy cow, that's powerful. Something's moving.
Yeah.
And it was probably about 3 weeks after that. I was pulling out my driveway, and as I backed out, I looked down the road, and there's 2 churches. I live by 2 churches. I see these 2 churches, and I'm headed toward our local Walmart. So I'm headed west down this road. I come to the stoplight, and over here to the left, there's another church that I had done a fundraiser for with our food truck. And I'm thinking, okay, here's another church, right? And I turn right, and as I'm going down the road, I go by the Lutheran church, and then I go by the Catholic church, and I pass the Presbyterian church. And it's like all these churches, and I'm just thinking, I'm in my mind, and I pull into Walmart, and I'm sitting there, and again, when people hear God spoke to you, it's always like, no, it wasn't like all of a sudden you and I talking here. It's just how it is. I think we all felt that sometime, right?
Yeah.
Just that conscience, or okay, that thought pops in. It's like, maybe that's from the Spirit.
Yeah.
It was one of those moments. And it was just this simple. It was like, here's the deal, Andy. I'm thinking about this eclipse, and I'm thinking about just all these churches I drove by, and just what religion's sort of done in my life. But I've always also had this, like, draw toward God.
Yeah.
And the voice, the message is this: you can wrestle with all this stuff over here, this church, this doctrines, the different philosophies, theologies. You wrestle with that all you want, but don't wrestle with me.
Yeah.
You know, because at the end of the day, I mean, you're not going to win this one. Over here, obviously, there are 800 different viewpoints. I mean, look how many churches are in Marion, right?
Yeah.
And then outside of that, how many home churches exist? I mean, so everybody's got like the whatever, and that's fine, and that's great. This isn't a slam on churches at all. It's just God is probably revealing himself in different ways to different people.
Yeah.
And for me, I never really found that way. And again, this isn't like we're not filming a commercial here, but it wasn't like that until I came to God's house, the church here in Marion, Friday when you were putting on those Friday night churches.
Yeah.
And that was like the first time, like, okay, this is where I belong. This is my people. And it was I found out during a break that RJ is actually from Connorsville.
Yeah.
And with our food truck, we go down there, we do this festival, or they do their county fair and a free fair. It's like a 9-day event. And over the last 4 years, there's a pastor that sets up this tent, and he makes these chocolate chip cookies, and he fills them in like a Frisbee. It's a great idea, and they're awesome. And they're really good. And he and I would always trade Frisbees for fish sandwiches, right?
Yeah.
But anyhow, we would have these conversations about faith. And he's awesome. He's just a great guy. I always look forward to going down there and talking to him. And this last year, I went and talked to him about that. And I told him, I was like, and here's the thing. I said, I don't know if you can really make a deal with God or tell God this is what you're going to do or what you're not going to do. But I remember sitting in that parking lot being like, here's the deal, though. I want to stay in the trenches. I just want to be in the trenches, working with people. And this pastor tells me, and this is probably like 2 months later, he's like, I just got done reading out of 2 Kings, and then go home and read. It's like chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. Go check it out. So I do. And then it's a story about 3 kings, and they're moving their army, they're moving their cattle across the land, and they come up on dry land. There's a famine going on, and you know people are going to die of thirst. And they go to Elisha and say, cry out to God and see what he says. And pretty much Elisha comes back and he says, this is what God says. Go out and build ditches. You will not hear the wind. You will not see the rain. I will fill the valleys full of water and give you total victory. And it was like, boom, there it is. So it's like, okay, that's where God and I are. Like, you know what? I'm out in the recovery world with my own personal recovery, doing things, trying to give back for all the second 5,000 chances I've been given. Yeah. Like we're digging ditches. We're in our communities. We're in our towns. We're digging ditches. What I love about that story is like those kings. I mean, they had everything. They never really had to probably depend on anything. But the thing they couldn't control is maybe rain. They had no control over that, right?
Yeah.
So they found themselves in a stage of life where they probably went to that gratitude well real quick. And maybe God was teaching them a lesson about gratitude. And it's just, I visualize in my head, we are just digging ditches. And at the end of the day, all the noise out there, in this business, it can get messy, right, John?
Yeah.
It gets messy, right? But hey, you're not going to hear the wind. You're not going to see it rain. Just keep digging. Yeah. And he said, I'm going to fill the valleys full of water, and I'm going to give you total victory. And that's the way I visualize myself with a pick in my hand. I'm just sitting here, I'm pounding, and I'm just going to keep digging. That's all I want to do. I mean, You meet great people. You talk about redemptive stories. You're hearing people your story is just remarkable. But I mean, it's just and it's not that people are heroes for where they were and where they're at. It's just more of it's a story of like, okay, wow, there's a grace and a mercy. And how this all works, I have no idea who gets it and who does or who doesn't. Why am I still here today and so-and-so's not here? I don't get that. And that stuff I'm not going to wrestle with no more because I don't think you can know that. But what I do know is I'm here today because of a grace and mercy. And because of that, I feel like I have to be grateful for that and give back where I can. and never take it for granted.
Yeah. Well, praise God. Because we've had conversations before, and you're always like, yeah, you know what I mean? So it's been really cool recently to see, like, you know, after all of this, like all of this process, you know what I mean, which is starting maybe in like 2002, I think you said, you know what I mean? Like, through that whole process to be able to hear from God in a Walmart parking lot.
Yeah.
That's a good place to hear from God, because I can't get into Walmart without Jesus. I can't do it. I can't. It's too stressful for me, so that's a good place to hear God. Because I know I talk to him a lot in the Walmart parking lot and walking in. And I want to thank you for sharing that. So at the beginning of the episode, we had brought up, I'm going to touch on this a little bit, but what we're going to do is a short about Try Recovery and stuff, a shorter podcast, and we'll release that here shortly. But you did start Try Recovery. So can you give us some info as we close out? Can you give us a little information about that? And then we're going to do we'll do something talking more in detail about health and wellness and fitness and all of that stuff in recovery, or just in life in general, right? So give us a little information. How can people find where Try Recovery's at? How can they contact you guys? All of that fun stuff.
Yeah, hey, thanks. So Try Recovery, in 2016, I just got to the point I couldn't stand myself. I needed to quit drinking. I needed to change. I shared sort of where I was at with my religion, with just my view of God. I didn't know where else to turn to, so I ended up going for a run one day. And I was like, I'm done drinking. When that urge came to drink, I went for a run. I don't know how far I ran. I was 245 pounds at that time. And what I know is, one, I thought I was going to die, but I didn't die. Mm-hmm. And second of all, I didn't drink that day. I liked how I felt afterwards. I hated how I felt during, but afterwards I felt, I accomplished something. I ran a mile today, right? So then the next day I did the same. The next day I did the same. And then in the process I was swimming, and then I also started doing some biking, and I got involved with the sport of triathlon. And I set a goal to do a triathlon that following summer. And so for about 10 months, I was focused on training and getting ready for this race. And that helped me really get along in my first few months, first year of my sobriety. And after I got done with that first race, I ended up thinking like, wow, that was awesome, but what now? And I literally remember sitting there thinking, well, I'm going to go back home. I'm going to celebrate with my friends. We're going to go down to the local bar and get hammered.
Right.
And it was like, well, that sort of defeats the purpose of what you're trying to do here. So anyhow, long story short on that, I set a goal that day. I was going to do a triathlon in every state by the time I turned 65. It's something I can work on daily. I'm going to have some fun with this. And so I started doing that. And then what I learned along the way was, through the sport, it was starting to create a self-confidence, self-discipline. I remember telling myself on a January morning, if I can walk into the YMCA at 5 a.m. and swim 2,000 yards on a January morning, I can walk away from that beer. Yeah. And I started seeing how this self-discipline was fluid in my life, right? And so it was like, okay, this is great. And then I also realized that, when I was doing cocaine and drinking, I never liked the 4-day binge. I always liked that first rail.
Yeah.
I never liked the last 30 beers in a 30-pack. I liked those first 6 beers in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And what I realized was I sort of liked that process of how my heart would go from resting to spiking. And I learned through this sport of triathlon, like I can still somewhat get that feeling, but afterwards it sucks getting to that point. Whereas with drugs, it's easy and it feels good, and then you feel terrible afterwards. But by doing this, it's like almost reverse. Like, it's not fun doing it, but when you're done, wow, this feels good. I accomplished something today. I did something I didn't want to do. And there's just those biological effects. Your endorphins are being released. And so I started learning some things about the biological side of recovery. And so we started this non-for-profit called Try Recovery. And what we do is we focus on this biological side of recovery. We help people realize that, our main goal is for you to be a little bit better today than what you were yesterday. And our meetings consist of a mile, whether it's a walk, run, or jog. Bring your family, bring a dog, bring a bike if you want to do that. Our meetings are outdoors. We are in the process of writing curriculum right now, which we should have that out, published here, hopefully by our target date is mid-February. And what we are doing is we're helping people relive. Like I mentioned earlier, and we've had this conversation, there's times in my life where I've been sober but not recovered. And it's helping people take it to that next level. Like just because you're never going to drink again, that doesn't mean your life's going to be horrible. Just because you're never going to go into a bar again, you don't have to regret that. Like, let's move forward. Let's find something you enjoy doing. We give out a reward system. We give out vouchers for shoes. We give out state park passes. We have rewards set up with state park passes to where, if they attend 5 different state parks within a year, they can get a medal. And I mean, it's just little things to motivate people, but at the same time, work the program. We're just another tool in the belt. I think I said that right. Tool in the belt, tool in the box.
Tool in the box or the belt.
Yep.
Both work. So that's awesome. And those are in Huntington, Bluffton, Wayne County, and Bern, Indiana.
Yeah, Fort Wayne, Allen County.
Fort Wayne, Allen County. So go check them out on Facebook. Try Recovery is also on TikTok if it still exists by the time we post this. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll probably be leaving TikTok, but we are on Instagram, Facebook, and again, you can check us out on just my personal page, Andy Yergler. That'll take you all the links to where we're connected at.
Sweet. So we thank you all for tuning in. My name is John Humphreys. I am the host. This is Escaping the Chains podcast. Go give us, if you listen to this episode, give us a review, give us some feedback, and let us know. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And if you want to just catch little glimpses of what we're doing, Escaping the Chains podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, you can find us there. Special thank you to Delivered Media and RJ. That's our guy, the production team. Without them, this doesn't happen. Thank you for Try Recovery, because they've actually been a touch of a sponsor in the past for a lot of the things we're doing, so we're very grateful for that. So we thank you all. You all have a blessed day. Please continue to listen. Thank you for all of the support. We love you guys.